here has been involved with BioDAOs. I'd like to go around and understand what has been the most surprising part of working inside a BioDAO so far. Whoever wants to go first. There's no order here.
Ladies go first.
There we go.
I think there were actually many surprising things. So I think everyone comes to a BioDAO with their own expectations, right? Sometimes you come with your startup background, so you bring that in. You come with your community background and you bring that in. And I personally have worked with communities, I've worked with startups, I work in the government, so I had I brought that background with me. And when we started working on BioDAOs, and also to make sure, I think all BioDAOs are different, right? So you bring your own culture to it. But I think the one surprising thing was when we got started was the amount of people that came to us and said I really want to support what you are doing. But then you realize what actually that means, right? So there's we started AthenaDAO back a year ago, right? When we launched, we had a lot of people coming to us, wanting to engage. It was a bull market, so everyone wanted to engage everywhere, right? And so we saw firsthand on how, on one hand, we didn't have the context to welcome everyone as we would like, or onboard everyone as we would like. But at the same time, I was actually very surprised where the mindset in DAOs is very much, you are driven, you are entrepreneurial, you bring your own expertise to support the DAO. And that was my expectation, right? And then suddenly I realized that most people wanted a job and a job description. And so that was also surprising, right? And I think one of the things, just to finalize, one of the great things about BioDAOs is the amazing people that we are able to attract, different backgrounds, more scientific, more operators. But on the other side, I saw also firsthand, especially in the bull market, how we were attracting a lot of people that just wanted to be around. And I think being able to create a structure that welcomes the right people, that incentivizes the right people to work with your DAO, I think is challenging. But once you do that, I think that's how you actually end up scaling. So that's my take.
Awesome. Yeah, I think there's two things that immediately come to mind. The first one is, and the place that we're in, working at BioXYZ and working at Molecule, we're looking for similarities that we can help build products toward to empower these BioDAOs to accomplish their mission. And I think we either hoped or planned for them to solve problems similarly. I mean, it's similar problems, similar organizational structure. I think we assumed that they would look at the problems the same way, yet it's almost because they're so close to each other and are able to kind of inspect how the other ones are doing. It's almost like you have a few siblings in a family and how they look at what the other siblings are doing and they're naturally repelled to doing things that way just because there's certain things that they don't like, or there's healthy competition there. So it honestly makes our lives super difficult trying to build products to groups that are trying to solve problems very differently, even though those problems in their goal are super similar. So that has definitely been a struggle, but a healthy one and definitely an educational one. I think the second biggest piece is, everyone thinks, with DAOs you make these bounties and people just come and claim the bounties, right? If you bring money, they will come. And to me, what's been super fascinating has been that the best contributors at all of the DAOs aren't there for the tokens. They're there because of the mission. And maybe that's obvious, but it's just very surprising, or it was surprising at first. Now I'm just being, it's being validated over and over again that the most productive individuals in all of the DAOs are the ones that are there for the mission. And they don't really care about the token. I mean, it's something of interest. They know that it's useful to bring attention from the greater community that doesn't really care about the mission. And it's a good vortex of attention, but beyond that, I mean, they're there to solve the problem and building DAOs that really have a very crisp, aligned mission, I think is becoming super pertinent, just as a priority.
Two things come to mind straight away. So the first one is how incredibly strong community can be as a force or a vector for change or momentum or any of these things. So, I mean, seeing people basically show up on a Discord server and then more or less completely entrench themselves in an organization, spending a huge amount of waking energy trying to make something work and contribute to a collective vision it's just an incredibly powerful thing to see, and it also how that scales via network effects is really moving. It gave me a lot of confidence early on that like the challenges that one could possibly try to solve with BioDAOs is like potentially limitless. I think communities like HairDAO have been like one of the most incredible examples of this in a really short timeline, like literally doubling the global spend on R&D in a therapeutic area and going from like not to a very involved community and like literally a promising therapeutic in like almost no time at all that will be like tested clinically. This is completely profound. On the other side of it, I think to give one slightly negative surprise, I think like democracy is so much more difficult than people think. It's not easy at all. Like coordination challenges that come from trying to get a bunch of people, smart people with different ideas to agree on things is insanely challenging. I think this whole kind of one token, one vote system that has largely been rolled out as quote unquote governance is hugely problematic, for lack of a better term. I think governance is also, like, we're very presumptuous in this space. We believe that, like, everyone really wants to be involved in governance and want to vote, when in many cases, most people just want a solution to their problem. They want to see the mission get solved. They don't really want to spend all their day on a Discord or voting yes or no on proposals. And so what you tend to see in the space is relatively low voter turnout, if you want to think about it that way. Or those people with like the most skin in the game, maybe spending the most time engaging. But like, I was really, really surprised by like how few people make actual proposals in DAOs. Anyone can pretty much make a proposal at like any time in any DAO. This is like alpha if you don't know this, by the way. Show up on a Discord and like make a proposal. Not that many people do, and I think it's out of like probably a combination of like fear and us not doing a good enough job actually explaining how these things work. But there's a huge amount of headroom for improvement on really enabling more folks to get involved in like the solutioning space around DAOs.
Yeah, I think amazing points raised. Like for context, I'm also like kind of got into Ethereum like 2016 because of DAOs, because I like the idea, and I think like since then, to be honest, like for me, these DAOs are the first ones that really seem to work. Like of course there's a bunch of other DAOs, but I think a bunch of them are much more like corporation. Like every DeFi DAO comes to mind, like Uniswap DAO, I don't see at all close to the concept of a DAO. It's still governed by VCs and the team, and I think it's more like almost like interesting to see, like in actuality, I think to this mission point that at the end, for me, it's like a vehicle to achieve a mission, and I think for decentralized science, that's the most important aspect. But I think, of course, also more like to also some of the more summer notes, like I think it's by design political and thus to an extent bureaucratic. And I think even interacting with some, like a great example was for me interacting with like a GitCon, for example. Didn't happen through governance. It happened through knowing the 4 or 5 people who make decisions there still. And it's like probably one of the biggest DAOs in the space. The governance doesn't happen through the proposals, I would say. It's like, it's through knowing the people, having trust and knowing, hey, if you have a good idea, like the biggest people there will vote yes, if you align the idea with them. So I think it's similar, I think, in BioDAO, like if I think a random person would come in with a weird proposal, it would just be voted down. But like if it comes from within and is kind of like aligned with some of the most active contributors, it has a much higher chance to succeed. So there's this whole human element and coordination element outside of just someone making a proposal and voting on it. And I think it's incredibly powerful if one has a community also with like high agency that wants to do something, like that wants to fund research and wants to discuss research. But I think it like will be interesting to see how this scales, because to all the earlier points, like I think it's great for capital formation, as also some of the biggest DAO cases showed. But I think it will be interesting to see over the very long term how to make sure one grows the active set of really valuable contributors and keeps them engaged, because I think it's also easy to lose them, but I think it's much easier with a strong mission. Like in longevity, you have people so excited by the mission that they're like happy to work on it for free, kind of to make an impact. And I think that was also the most powerful thing to see with some people just showing up on every governance proposal. Like they don't have to do it, and they probably don't even have big ownership, but coming up with like really amazing comments and thoughts. And I think that's what's really exciting to see in these.
We heard a lot about people being surprising here, and so I wanna touch on that a little farther. One of the, there's a panel on pros and cons of DAOs. Obviously, people make up organizations. We've heard things like, some people are expecting a job description, super talented people that are there for the mission, really make a difference. Can you all talk about, what you've seen be the pros of working in a DAO, of attracting really good talent, and then sort of the cons of like the people side of organizations in a DAO? Because we know that everything comes with two sides to that coin.
Yeah, sure. I think the big pros is like, as Tyler was saying, like it's a Discord, you can come in. I sometimes say like it's like a startup with an open door, right? Anyone can come in, you don't even need to knock, you just come in, you start seeing what's happening, you start interacting with other people. I think like now we are actually better at onboarding in general. These side DAOs are much better at onboarding than we were like a year ago, right? So I think now people come and there's like a path to contribution that I think before it was a little bit harder. And so I think like the good point is anyone can come in, see what's happening, see where they actually fit and where they can engage, start immediately adding value. And I think as Benji was saying, I think like some of the most like interesting people or interesting contributors are not the ones that immediately want you to compensate them, right? Are the ones that like start adding value because they are so aligned with the mission, they really believe in what we are doing, that they want to be around and want to be part of it, right? So I think that's the big thing that we are at least seeing in AthenaDAO is like the people so engaged, and no matter like the expertise, right? Some people come to the Discord, it's the first time they actually join Discord, right? We can see like they joined the AthenaDAO the same day that they joined Discord because they were excited about the mission and want to engage with the community. I think that's the good thing. I think on the other side is what I was mentioning before, right? Some people come, honestly, sometimes with I would say a DeFi mindset, right? So I think for a long time, DeFi was like about throwing money everywhere, and they come to us. Like we did a bounty, for example, where we were asking people to understand like who in our community would make sense to write some articles for our blog. And it was super interesting because like we actually asked for a specific women's health experience and science background. And I think we had hundreds of applications. And I think maybe 5% of them were, or even less, were with people actually with a women's health background. And they were all of them wanted to write these very generic articles for us, and then you were like, I received messages from everyone asking me like, you don't answer me, why? Or like, people were complaining, or like because we were not giving them immediately the bounty, right? So I think that's the thing, but I think this takes time, right? So I'm very bullish on building a community in Web3 because I think you can really find amazing people out there that really are in line with your mission, and I think it's much easier for DeSci and BioDAOs. But at the same time, I feel like, yeah, you have to find the right people and make sure that with your culture, with your content that you put out there, over time, more and more people align with you actually come in.
Yeah, that was great. That covered a lot. So I'll be very brief. Another two things that immediately come to mind. Number one is when I entered the space and I saw how many people were anonymous in all of the Discords, it definitely threw me off, and I definitely kind of had the stigma that if you were anon, you were trying to scam somebody or you had something to hide. I think when you're dealing with patient communities, it's a very different reason to stay anonymous. And so not only that, but it really takes away like the egocentric nature that you can sometimes find in corporations. And when you're reduced to just like a username and your output, I think the output quality is much higher because that's all you have to show for your reputation within the community. And I just have found that it's actually the anonymous people that are often, creating the highest leverage work. What was the other point I wanted to make? I think, yeah, so just looking around the room, there's some chairs open here. I think it's important for all of us to ask the question of like, who would we best fill these chairs with? And for me personally, just seeing the space from my perspective, we need scientists, and we need scientists with biotech experience who understand how to not just identify interesting science, but actually translate it into medicines that are going to change the game. And yeah, so it's on us to build tools that attract them and keep them here, and it's on us to make sure that the reputation of DeSci is not aligned with like the bad parts of crypto, but are rather the great parts of patient communities. And so yeah, I think we all carry that weight, and it's important that we all acknowledge that.
Yeah, I think you've both covered a lot, but it's like, the pro is that like there's a low barrier to entry and anyone can get involved, and the con is that there's a low barrier to entry and anyone can get involved, right? And so it's like, you kind of select for these two phenotypes. One is like highly motivated self-starter, wayfinding, gets involved, figures out ways to add value, and like on the other side of the coin, it's like opportunistic people who, maybe are not the right fit for a community. And I think the thing that you can do to kind of optimize that in the favor of the positive is like by creating culture. So like in the beginning with BioDAO, one of the things that like, if I walk into a room and there's an academic conversation happening about a paper, people discussing like the science of something, I'm probably not going to go in and be like, when moon, like whatever, because you would feel like really uncomfortable from a cultural perspective. And so I think these like cultural reinforcement patterns, figuring out in your community how like, what is the culture that you want to create, manifesting that, and then having a sort of like self-selection process where you start attracting, like attracts like, you start attracting the type of people you want to build with. This is great, but if you don't do that, if you're kind of laissez-faire about like what the composition of your community looks like, I think having these two groups, one that is like highly motivated, self-operating, and the other that is like, as you were describing before, these kind of like opportunistic people that show up and like want bounty and want to give like generic piece of work or something, can be like a massive headache. And this is why I think, I mean, to your point, these are human organizations, everything is about people in the end, everything is about talent. How do you select for the right type of person and create the right type of culture? I think it's by having like a very clear idea of what you're building, and then like making sure that every person who joins also has a clear idea.
Yeah, I think one interesting thing for me to observe was like really almost like the power law of just sometimes having like one individual contribute like more than like every other individual combined, or having like 3 anonymous users giving like more useful comments than like the other 10,000 users combined. It's like, it's pretty wild to see, and it's not like, in a sense, like there might be someone putting in a lot of capital and they don't even comment once on the Discord, and you don't even know them. You just see it, that they contributed a lot. Maybe they, like you can't also map it, like the on-chain address to like a username, like you don't know if the people that put in a lot of money are even in the Discord. And like it's really fascinating to see just like on a lot of dimensions that I think it's really about like to an extent finding like really strong, of course, contributors, getting to like relevant amounts of resources to fund science with, and like to relevant researchers. And I think it's sometimes hard to square like different things attract different people, and you kind of need to attract the strongest scientists, the strongest people in crypto. And I think culturally those things are very different. Like in terms of like what speaks to some of the leading figures in crypto about BioDAO might be very different to what speaks for scientists about it. But I think I think really hard to reverse engineer. But like it's interesting to see like how stark, basically, like how inactive like a large chunk also of people is, but then how insanely active some people are. Or like and I think at the end of the day, it's like also a challenge to ultimately get more people involved, or get more people like really committed behind it.
Yeah, and in my experience, I've seen the anonymity help to bring out a meritocracy as well, because it's not like, oh, I know who these people are. I'm gonna actually just want to get behind the person who has the best ideas, who's contributing the hardest and pushing the most for the mission forward. So all great responses. I'd love to switch gears and talk a little bit about launching a token. All of you have now been in the process of doing that. Talk to us about what it's like before there's a token, and then after there's a token. What is that like? Are you glad you launched your token? What can we all learn from tokens being integrated?
A few days in, so it's very recent. I think like just one thing. I think because like we got here, but there was like something that is very challenging for us to get here is like all the legal and all the tooling. We haven't talked about it, but I really feel like that's one of the big challenges that we have. And if we want more people to get into the ecosystem, start building DAOs, we really need to streamline the legal and even like operations process, right? Tooling is terrible. Like as Lauren and I, we talk about like how everything is hard at Web3, right? I think even Paul said yesterday, like building a BioDAO is super hard, but it's also super hard because of like the lack of tooling, all the legal regulations that you have to care about. So I think in the end we'll all be like lawyers and all have all this information, because right now I can already discuss a lot about securities and all that, but quite well. So I think that's one. I think up to now, like that's one of the big challenge for like taking a DAO out of the ground. But for us, what's very important, like, because for you to be a DAO, you have to have some kind of token out there, right? You have to have, the token allows us to kick off governance. Maybe there's other ways of doing that. That was the way we choose to do. And I think once we do that, there are different challenges that we also, of course, we have. But I feel it actually becomes more, like people get more involved. I think people also, like, we were able to attract a lot of like new people that were interested in Web3, but also interested in women's health in general. So I think like after just a few days of launching the token, we are happy with it. I think the work starts now again, right? But I think it's like if you want to have a token, a DAO, or be part of DAO, the DAO has to have a token, I would say, and that will allow you to do much more than we were able to do before.
Cool, yeah. So I think, you know, there's kind of the idea, or it's a Winston Churchill quote, like democracy is the worst form of government with the exception of all the others. I think a token is like the same concept. Like it's kind of a necessary evil. I don't know how else to do it. Going back to your point, which I think is so key, which is that the utility isn't quite there yet. We haven't done enough experimentation on the smart contracts around the token to like really answer the question of are we maximizing the utility of it. We constantly get questioned by people that are looking at the space, deciding whether to invest into it, and saying, where's the token utility? And I think that we've just scratched the surface and we have so much more work to do, and you know, suggestions are welcome, obviously. And yeah, I think that it's very difficult to comment too heavily because none of us have really invested our time too much into developing token utility. There's certain pieces we're thinking about. We've experimented a little bit with getting access to the DAO's IP via the governance token. Obviously voting on governance proposals, but you know, we're barely scratching the surface. And then I think the other key point here is that if the token is the center of attention, then you know, you're screwed, right? I think it's just like, it should be secondary. It should be a good, kind of like I said before, vortex of attention of people outside. You know, like when my parents are asking me how I'm doing, they're like, oh yeah, did you see the hair DAO, like hair token price? Yeah, that's correlated with my happiness, yes. But yeah, I mean, it's good for people outside to kind of get a health check. You know, I mean, if you're a doctor and you're looking at a patient, it's kind of a good way to see, you know, how is the patient doing? But it's not that correlated. You know, I mean, you can have one token holder liquidate, and you know, the DAO's great. It's making all these moves, but if the token goes down, people get the wrong idea. So I think you have to be super careful about how you're interpreting like the token price, which is what everyone does, as like the first health check of the DAO. And yeah, so I think it's not great to have it, but it's kind of a necessary evil.
Yeah, super good points. I think from my perspective, just to the original question was thinking about the pre and post token kind of era of the DAO. I think pre-token is super necessary because you very quickly get a sense of who are intrinsically motivated people. So if you want to find a good way to, and I recognize that this is also a luxury and not everyone can do it, but the people who are building a community before there's any clear incentive are likely motivated probably the most by the core mission to a certain extent. And I would imagine solidifying that group as a core team that's going to like set the culture in a DAO is extremely important. I think the token enables a certain level of scalability and a certain utility, which there's still like a huge amount of room to experiment with. I would say we've, to your point, like barely scratched the surface. But the way I think about it is that like at scale, the way it should function is like a functional meritocracy, in that folks that contribute a lot of work to an organization should actually have the most say in it. And obviously that gets a little muddled because it's also capital. Like it's not only work, it's also capital, and these kind of forces are at odds. And I think there's a lot of really innovative ways to make token designs function more in the way that we want to like see in this space, but there's actually not a huge amount of experimenting with it yet, because I think a lot of the best token engineers have not necessarily come into DeSci yet, and I think scientists and people who are maybe even quite switched on when it comes to like how would you create the right incentive frameworks in these communities are also not necessarily in DeSci yet. So I agree with your point that it's a necessary evil. I think when I was thinking about it initially from like an incentive engineering perspective, it's really nice to have like, one can't just throw around like startup equity as easily as one could throw around tokens. And one cannot necessarily empower people to have a really functional say in an organization in as kind of like software-driven and direct a way as tokenization enables. But at the same time, you will find that once you have tokenized, you do open up the door to opportunists. And this is just kind of I think a necessary evil that comes with it.
Yeah, I fully agree with all the points raised. And I think at the end, like, a token is at the heart, of course, of every DAO, and I think it's like has insane strength and weaknesses. It's a bit like Charlie Munger said, like if you can design the incentives, design nothing else. And I think to an extent, it's very easy to scrub the incentive design, like with everything, with the state, with a company, with like any incentive. And I think it's really challenging to like find the right balance, which actually like drives a DAO to success. I think that it's also like on the utility, like even if I personally think about it, like there's 10,000 probably tokens out there, and like I've actually probably looked at a bunch, like a decent chunk of them, probably more than anyone in the room, and by having built like a DEX and spend way too much time in DeFi, and I must say, like, there's not even 5 tokens I want to buy. Like, and what just shows it's not like that there's not even 5 interesting projects. It's like almost no token has utility. Like, what's the utility of Uni's token or Aves token or like Maker's token? Like, it's not clear. And then suddenly some projects, I think like Ethereum is a great example, have really figured it out, and like it clicks and makes sense also to even like very large stakeholders. And I think it's quite complex for these projects because it's so much more than just like pure utility in an economic sense. Like maybe in DeFi, people look at it with a very different lens, like looking at the underlying protocol revenue and like usage and how that the utility connects to that. But I think for DeFi, it's almost like a bit more mimetic and a bit more cultural, and of course like with strong even utility tying into the mission. But it's even a question to me like how, in which direction one wants to take a utility also determines the incentives and who one attracts. So I think it's actually quite changing, and like there's always trade-offs to specific utility design. So yeah, I think it's complex, and I think as a maybe last point, I think BioDAOs, I think if like way too few strong crypto people, like close to none. Like I sometimes feel like I'm not, like literally there's like not even one person with like a deep DeFi experience in most DAOs, and then some are of course like a slightly different and have some of those people. But it's really crazy to see. It's like how and then also almost like how little understanding there is, like in even very big projects, to be honest. When I talk to the leadership of like tokenomics, token design, liquidity, like how all of these things work, like most people have absolutely no clue, like zero, like none, in a whole organization of a big effort. And I think it's really like not enough time is put into it, and like I think it's so crucial, but there's not enough people thinking about how to do it in a smart way. And in general, like speaking to crypto and actually understanding, like for example, Z Prime did an interesting talk yesterday, and there's very few, I think, actually touch points for a lot of projects with actual people in crypto that really like understand tokens and understand token utility and like ask the hard questions. So I think there needs to do like sometimes, like for a lot of projects, including these guys, sometimes like a reality check actually what the people putting in funding and that actually will become big stakeholders, like what they also expect to see in terms of utility and like which direction they want to take it potentially.
All right, we only have 2 minutes left, and I'd like to open it up to the audience to ask our last and final question. Yes. Anyone want to ask our astute panel the last question of the day and bring us home?
Oh, we've heard you before.
Get out of here. You want to go?
So let's think about 1 year from today, in the future. Where would you like to see this?
I like that question. I'll answer first. We're doing DeSci Berlin again next year.
I think like for me, to an extent, the only thing that matters is like radical scientific progress. Like I don't care if like all the tokens go to zero and like we're all poor. Like if we solved aging, for example, like I would rather like have BioDAOs solve aging and be worthless than be worth like infinite amounts and we made zero progress on aging. And I think that's like possible. Like a great example was Constitution DAO, like 100xing in value, and they didn't got the Constitution. It was just like a meme coin. Like, and I think that is failure to an extent, even though it might look like success to crypto people. So I think it's at the end, I would like to have seen like massive progress, like from solutions to HANAs to longevity. And I think 1 year is tough for science, but ideally we see some progress.
Awesome. Add your point. Go for it. Please, go for it.
Yeah.
Really.
Can we see a fucking bull market? Jesus Christ.
Sorry I cut you off there. Tyler, we want to hear you.
I very boring, pragmatic viewpoint. I would love to see like a drug in the clinic that emerged from this kind of nascent space.
Sick. How great would that be? Awesome. Okay, let's give it up. Team.
But I think we also need more researchers, we need more like biotech people, we also need more women. So I would love to see more like a room completely, maybe like even a bigger venue, completely full with people that are participating and contributing actively to BioDAOs, but also wanted to actually build some, right? Because it's like, it's true that the landscape is growing, but we are far from the potential that this space have, right? So hopefully in a year, all of you will have your own DAO. And, and we'll be able to excite other people to do the same.